So it's not really even who gets to say, it's how they get to say it, right?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know? And I think that might be worth focusing on more. Um, I mean, I'm trying to go for basic principles. First of all, what do they get to establish something about? Which in your examples was actually pretty broad. Second, how does that relate to material that other players have felt like they were the consult for? And I think that a check in is a good idea. But then what other things are non negotiable? Hey, it is my point. And when I say this, it goes. I mean, the GM has to take it, so do you.
Right.
What aspects of this point spending are in that category where nobody can gainsay you? Other things you have to check.
That is, that's exactly right. Because I want to be able to throw characters into scenes, and maybe they don't even the players like,
Uh,
you
uh,
know,
yeah, but it's the right
get your
kind
way
of
out of
I
this.
know that. I know that
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. It's like,
Right.
oh,
Yeah.
that sucks. Okay, cool. What do I do? Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um. So yeah. So finding that line, right? Like, so creating a scene where you put a character into trouble, like another character, right, can be fun, and I like that. But then there's another thing where you're talking, we're talking about hitting something that hits that identity, right? So let's say that you have a character, and you're picking on them, and you're like, okay, this scene we're starting, and you're in this other character's bed, you're waking up, the princess and like the dad is coming to get you. Like you've not only put them in trouble, but you've established that
You've
they
made
have a
some
relationship.
decisions for them. You played them a little bit. Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when some people will be fine with it, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but
Well, but that's
some
why
won't.
those are the situations where you ask.
Right.
Right. So instead of saying you can't do that, which just creates debates, then it's a matter of saying, would you do that? Because if you would, I have I got a hassle for you.
Mhm.
And so the sort of uh, I think there is kind of an identifiable line there. And you said it yourself. It's when you actually made decisions for that character that landed them in this situation. Some sort of interactive decision for a decision about how they interacted. Um, I'm perfect. If you're going to say if we've been dealing with this powerful individual who's been after us and messing with us, and we've messed with them a bunch of times, and this time I say, well, yeah, you're hanging on the guy's wall in chains. Somebody could say, well, wait, you just played a whole bunch of things that we didn't actually play. But on the other hand, yeah, they could have gone that way, right? I'm good with that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Or the or if you say on the other hand, like you said, I mean, if you've been married to the witch of awful, then what somebody might say, excuse me, but I wouldn't be caught, I wouldn't be caught within 30 meters of that one, of that lady. I'm not, no way.
Right.
I mean, how would that have happened? Forget it. Um, so it just seems, I mean, it's dangerous because how about is like one of the worst phrases you could use in all of role playing because all of us are endless how abouters and what about and but
Mhm.
if that, and all this crap will just proliferate. So how to ask is kind of a good thing to know. Um, and I mean, you're just gonna have to see how it goes. I mean, but if you say safest thing is just not ever to mess with anybody's identity, just give us a situation that we all think or that is obviously legit, and doesn't change anything. Like you say, no new information, just move us ahead in these interactions of some kind. That's fine. Um, but when you actually had a character make decisions, that's when maybe it's good to ask. It's whether it's a real line or not. At least it's function. It's practical at the moment, anyway. I mean,
Hmm.
it's. I'm thinking the trouble is my brain keeps coming up with counter examples all the time as I think about this stuff. Um,
Right.
because
Uh,
sometimes something radical somebody says, you're like, oh, I never thought of that. I wouldn't do that. And I was like, ooh, except this time I did, right?
yeah.
And you never know, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so I can't say there's a hard and fast rule, but I do know that there are limits that different people will have. And if they're good with the way you do it, then it might be good to just examine the way you do it and say, okay, that's how we all do it. Um, saying, okay, well, you do it like a GM is kind of dangerous because that word is in many people's minds by definition an overriding and intrusive power rather than just a particular arrangement of authorities, which is not threatening.
Right.
The main possibility here then is just simply to have aired these topics. All right, let me start over. The real value here is just to air the topics so that you can sort of parse out what might be colliding, what might be tricky for some people or places where they don't have enough trust, or perhaps they're right not to have enough trust. This other player just doesn't have the skills or to have people can get kind of drunk with the whole thing. They feel like they've been handed, the keys to the kingdom and can say the sun goes nova or something, right? They can say anything. I can say anything. This is great. It's like, well, no, you can't say anything. You can exert authorities in particular directions and with particular interactions. It's not the same thing as being allowed to say anything.
Right. It's like I want to say, okay, you can push people's boundaries a little bit, be uncomfortable in a good way, but don't be a dick.
Right.
Right.
I agree about that, and it is. I do think that there are technical terms for exactly where those uh, those happen, but you're not going to get anywhere by using those technical terms because we're talking about how we experience them, not how we understand them,
Right.
right? So that's a fairly important difference. You can explain something, I can explain metabolism accurately over and over and over and over. It's not going to change anybody's misunderstandings about the word energy. So if we look at this then as procedure, I've built up some karma points. Different people have karma points though, right? At these points when
Hmm.
the at
Yeah.
this scene
Everybody
thing,
does. Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
the interesting thing, isn't it? How does having multiple people with them interact? What happens in your experience? What do people spend them on? I mean, how is this new scene constructed with different people with varying points of karma?
Well, most of the time, because one of the ways that you can use it is to kind of get a bonus on a roll, right? So, um,
Yeah, but that went
right.
away. I'm talking about this time when we're at the juncture of the scene and we are using them to establish scene stuff.
Yes. So, I mean, most people you because you can use them whenever. So people will use them in the moment. Uh, Usually a very small thing that helps them do something. They establish that maybe the guard is his back is to you, not
Right.
he's not
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So that's how most people use it. But some of the more, I think, story minded or like overarching, like narrative minded people who aren't thinking about the moment, but thinking about what's going on, they wait and they'll use it at interesting points to put a twist on things.
Now, in those circumstances, do people do it only one at a time, or do you sometimes have two people using their points in the same phase?
I've never had. people use them at the same.
That's an interesting. That's okay. So that's kind of interesting. First of all, let's just take that as an observation, right? That if your rules allow for it, sooner or later it will happen. And then what? If you've sort of discovered a rule, which is that it should be one person, then we don't have an answer for either of those, which one is right, but it's an issue, it's a thing, right? To note. Okay, so sticking with what's happened in reality so far, we've got one person. They've got a karma point or two or three, and they say, "This is our new scene. This is He's not just putting things here and there in the current scene. He's saying we're in a new scene, and it's like this." There are so many things to consider. If there were unknowns in the previous scene that just closed, how much of those get to be resolved by this new scene being in place? In the game Star Trek Adventures, there is a GM resource called Threat, and they begin play a session with a certain amount of threat. But the players, by taking extra dice and doing a variety of things, and also then with certain outcomes of rolls, the GM gains more threat. The players are bucking for something called momentum, which they can carry over from exchange to exchange or conflict to conflict. And the GM is basically bulking up on threat as they go. And of course, they have to spend it to make their oppositions more effective in a variety of ways. All that is the context for an interesting use of threat, which I found somewhat scribbly in the rules. You got the idea that they thought it sounded cool, but maybe spitballed it during play, but hadn't really thought about it much. And it's called, oh God, what was it? I forgot what it's called. But the point was that you could, at the end, in the middle of a scene where, particularly where it seemed like it would be tedious to play it all out, that per character, it was 2 threat per character in the scene, player character, to establish something as closed. So you could say, okay, guys, you lose this. There's a big phaser fight's going on. Fine. You lose the phaser fight. So 2 threat per player character for that. I've got a ton of threat left. And you're all in the brig, of this other starship. So that's 2 more per character. So that's pretty radical to be able to spend like that. I mean, that's like totally taking over the current scene, closing it, and then moving into the framing up of another scene with events right in the middle. I mean, that's almost writing a novel instead of play. And I noted that it was very easy for a game master to give themselves way more cut power and conclusion power than I think was warranted by the way they wrote the rules. I mean, you could just say, oh, okay, well, there's the starship battle, and by the way, that ship got blown up. And you're kind of like, wait, what? And you're like, yeah, I spent the threat for it. And you're like, that's a lot of that's a lot of boom for 2 piddly little threat there, right? So the idea here is when these people spend their points, what can they conclude about what was unknown beforehand, and what can they do to set us up in terms of events in the interim? Over formalizing this, like with a whole table of what you can spend karma points for and how many and all that, I don't think is very useful. I
Right.
do think it's useful to look at what people are actually doing when it seems to work really, really well. So, what standards are they abiding by when you say, I love the way that guy frames it? I mean, everyone's looking forward to when Bob frames a scene for us. Look out, Bob's got a karma point. We're screwed now, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Bob gets a karma point in play, and everybody winces, and it's like, oh, sure, we're in this fight, or we're in this situation, or we're doing this thing, but when that's over, I see you, Bob. I see you. You're going to spend that
Right,
on
yeah.
us, aren't you? Right? We're going to get it, and that's a good thing. So, but what is it that makes that something that people anticipate and recognize when it happens? Here it comes again, everybody. Right? Here
Mhm.
he goes. Um, and when is it more like, oh shit, play's going to get ruined? Right now, those stupid points are going to come in and make our lives miserable as people, as players.
Right.
Um, and I guess he has to because he's got a story point, so he's got all the power now. Right? There's something wrong with that, isn't there?
Mhm.
So, what is it about the players who are really good at it? What are they doing? What are they abiding by? What are they, um, and if you know that, then that means that whoever it is who's skeptical about these things may have the chance to say, oh, okay, I guess there are some written standards here. There is something to go by.
Right. That I'll have to think of.
Yeah, it's a tough call because you're actually going a lot farther than some of the games that I'm familiar with this. One of the most famous is called Primetime Adventures.